Hi everyone, and welcome to this session, which covers an introduction to Wazuh, event correlation, and host intrusion detection. Wazuh is a fork of a historical, or not so historical, but a previous GitHub project called OpenSCAP HIDS, which was created as the first integrity monitoring solution for multiple platforms, which covered Linux and Windows. This was extensively used by companies and businesses that required compliance verification for certain types of files, folders, registry settings, etc. This was especially prevalent for businesses that had PCI DSS compliance and people that worked with data that was considered classified or secure, so that modification and manipulation or changes to files containing such information could be tracked. The HIDS portion of the solution works with signature detection and rootkit detection. Integrity monitoring has default items internal to the solution that is specified, such as in the case of Windows, the Windows folder, the System32 folder, etc., as well as certain registry keys that are being monitored. These can all be adjusted for specific needs of an organization and can be customized completely to whatever needs you have. The entire system functions with decoders and rules. Decoders and rules are both based on XML language, and essentially the decoders will break down the events ingested into attributes based off of regex structures. This information is then passed to the rules engine, which will process the rules based on the attributes received and generate alerts accordingly of various levels. We will go into more details of those in a later part of this training. So the big part of Wazuh is the correlation aspect. So changing data for correlation purposes after it's been ingested is significantly more complicated than performing pre-correlation before it's permanently stored. This is where Wazuh's engine becomes really valuable. You can build custom rule sets and use the default ones to ensure that any known issues that there are rules for, or that you can create rules for, are detected the minute the events are received, rather than having alert triggers continue to monitor ingested events at a later stage. As stated, this is very important for compliance purposes to ensure that events are correlated and analyzed at ingestion. It is impossible for businesses to generally have a massive SOC team that can sit and crawl through unvetted or uncorrelated data. This is sometimes referred to as the wall of noise. Wazuh aims to address that issue as best as possible and allows for customization along the way. Files can either be picked up by the manager or the agent, or it can also ingest syslog-based data that's sent to it. The decoders and the rules apply to everything regardless of the source of the data. The system currently supports Windows, various versions, Linux, also various versions and distributions. They go as far back as Red Hat 5. Also Mac, various versions. It is usually for up-to-date versions of software, but if you find that you need older support for older systems, you can always install an older version of Wazuh. It will mean that the feature sets regress, so you may not have all the features of the latest version, but it still will allow you to have some kind of coverage for your environment. The initial dashboard contains quite a few of the items that will be discussed during this training. The security events, integrity monitoring, and Amazon AWS events deal specifically with security information management. There's also audit and policy monitoring with policy monitoring, system auditing, OpenSCAP and CIS-CAT. Then there's threat detection and response, which is vulnerabilities, VirusTotal, OSQuery, the Docker listener. And then there's the compliance container, which is PCI DSS and GDPR at this point. Wazuh is actively working on adding additional compliance, and CMonster has already generated additional rules or incorporated additional rules that contains additional compliance coverage, such as NIST, etc. Much of the configuration can be monitored or controlled through this interface. This has been an increasing endeavor by Wazuh over the past few years, as initially it was all command line based. Now some of the changes can be effected through this console, from the management portal at the top, as well as the agents portal at the top, and even DevTools if you want to review the data in its raw format. So there are various dashboards to assist with fast and visual detection of anomalies and correlated events. These demonstrate the effect that it has when SOC team members, for example, if they have to look at thousands of lines of events, they may not necessarily spot an event that gives rise, or a grouping of events that gives rise to further investigation. With dashboards, visualizations, etc., it makes it much simpler for human perception to detect anomalies in the flow of data and events. And that's where these dashboards become really useful. On the security events dashboard, all events are correlated with alert levels, the definitions, the names of the rules, etc., to give clarity as to what is being represented there. From the integrity monitoring side, it gives you a complete breakdown of all the detected changes in monitored folders, registry settings, etc. It also provides a listing of the hosts the changes were detected on. And it also allows for collection of WHO data. Now, WHO data is an extension of file access auditing, to ensure that you get as much detail as possible when files are opened, changed, manipulated, deleted, etc. Then there's also the Amazon AWS component to this. It graphically displays all the AWS log events that are being ingested, and the supported logs are included as AWS S3 buckets, AWS CloudTrail, AWS Config, AWS VPC, etc., etc., etc. You can see on the screen the numbers that are supported there. Each one of these will have to be configured on an individual basis, as well as if you have multiple VPCs, etc., you will have to create this for each instance that you're monitoring. Policy monitoring consists of three components: Rootcheck, OpenSCAP, and CIS-CAT. Since version 9.3, Rootcheck has been replaced by Security Configuration Assessment SCA module. However, it still lists Rootcheck as the functional component if you go into the lower level system. Policies provided are based on the Center for Internet Security benchmarks, but they are not the official ones from the CIS Center. Additional items will need to be purchased if you want further benchmarks from the CIS Center, or you can construct your own, which we will get into later. A number of the default policies have been included, and others are available and can be enhanced for specific versions. Module checks for running processes, file presence, performance pattern matching in file contents, and performance string checking on registry keys, or if they're present or not. This is a part of the Rootcheck and the SCA modules, and it indicates the flow of what is being checked, etc. You will note that on the monitored host, on the left-hand side, there's three blocks that says Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, System Audit, and System Audit SSH. These are specific to Linux, however, there are Windows ones as well. But they are not as inclusive as the Linux ones, as there are multiple different Windows components that can be audited, and these can be added as needed. OpenSCAP is an integration model with Wazuh. It performs security compliance checking, vulnerability assessments, specialized assessments. In other words, checking for suspicious files or file names. OpenSCAP integration is only supported for Linux distributions. You would have to install the OpenSCAP scanner on the monitored host for this model to function, and you will also have to edit the osec.conf, which is the centralized configuration file on all Wazuh entities. It doesn't matter if it's the manager or the client that's being monitored, and you will have to enable it there as well for this to function. CIS-CAT, as stated, was developed for integration with CIS benchmarks. The integration requires the CIS-CAT Pro application that carries a license cost, and it performs benchmarks based on assessments which are globally recognized as a standard. The reason for that is you need to have uniformity when checking for things across multiple hosts. So we can all agree that standards are a good approach to ensure security compliance on various hosts, etc., and CIS-CAT assists with this. The vulnerability detection component of the solution generates a listing of all packages deployed to endpoints with an agent. It does this by scanning the environment and then documenting all the packages deployed. Packages are then compared with CVEs retrieved from distribution providers such as Canonical, and the distributions covered is Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu Debian, and Amazon Linux. Unfortunately, no Windows at this point. It will then clarify or compare the packages installed versus the packages that are available from the distribution providers, and it will list any CVEs that are found to be applicable to the environment being monitored. The next component is VirusTotal. VirusTotal basically takes the file hashes generated by the integrity monitoring component of the system, and then it will submit it to the VirusTotal API. This works for both the free and the paid versions, but both of these versions will reach rate limits at a certain point, depending on the company size and the volume of file changes taking place. Please bear that in mind. The file integrity monitoring triggers the lookup, and it will log events in the system based on rate limit reached, your check credentials, if your API credentials are incorrect, if there's no records found, so if the hash file is clean or the hash value is clean, and no positive match found. So the value has been found, but there's no virus detected by any of the engines. And then also, if it has been detected but is not cleaned by at least one of the engines, it will give you a number, and it will say a number of engines detected a match, which indicates a file that is either infected with a virus or some kind of malware or even shellcode. The Docker listener monitors for container activity. It's unfortunately Linux only. This has to be installed on the host where you're running the containers, and you have to add the Python library called Python Docker Library. This can be installed via pip. If you're familiar with Python, then you will know that pip is an installer used to add components to the Python in the environment. All features available on the agent is also available for the Docker server itself. And then finally, when it comes to Azure-Logs, Azure-Logs integration has been included since version 3.7. It can monitor all parts of Azure, including Azure Active Directory. Monitoring can include many items such as changes, instances, and health, date, etc. Now, what is important to note here is that each component of this needs to be manually configured at least once to set it up. Once the configuration has been performed, you can back up these configs. So if you ever have to deploy a fresh solution, etc., you can transpose these configurations into the next one. But you still have to manually configure each of the Azure items that you're going to be monitoring. This includes changes to your Azure environment to allow for the extraction of the data, and it also requires changes to the osec.conf, which is the central configuration file as mentioned earlier. Examples will be given of this in the next part of this training series, and it will demonstrate how to configure these items successfully for your environment. Please note that this training or this session only includes the most prominent features that are often requested or is directly visible from the console. Wazuh has numerous items that are not plainly visible in the dashboard or console that can be configured from the command line, and we will be deep diving into some of those items along with how to configure the items discussed in this session as part of the next session. There's a lot of documentation on the Wazuh website that covers the more integrated or integral parts of the configuration items. Feel free to browse their website. Please bear in mind that the current version is 3.9, but later versions will be released as well. So depending on the version of Wazuh for your SeaMaster installation, it is important that you make sure that the version is correctly selected on the Wazuh website. That brings to an end this session. I hope you found it informative, and I'll see you in the next one.